Your next promotion is within your control, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 122. Today's episode, I have a very special guest named Julia Arndt. I met Julia when I was a guest on her podcast called Stressed without the E. And I love that because it shows you that there's another side of stress. And Julia learned this the hard way. She worked at Google for many years. And as you know, I also live in the Bay Area, and things can be a little bit stressful out here in Silicon Valley. And at one point in her career, she found herself hitting a wall. Lucky for her and lucky for us today, she came out on the other side. Now she teaches how to be more productive, how to operate at peak performance. And in today's interview, she's going to teach you how to do that as well. Let's get started.
Welcome to Maximize Your Career with Stacy Mayer, a podcast about achieving your career goals while also being yourself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Maximize Your Career. I'm your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, especially to be here with you this week as I have a very special guest. This guest in particular lives like really, really close to me, but also kind of far. And I got very excited when I met her just a few weeks ago when I was a guest on her podcast, Stressed. We had such an amazing conversation. And then she said she's actually in Tahoe. And as you might know, I live in Berkeley, California. And I was like, oh my goodness, I was just in Tahoe. We should hang out. And it's always so amazing in this virtual world how close we can really be to somebody and not even realize it, because you're just meeting up with people on video. They could be across the world and it feels like they're in your backyard, or they could be in your backyard and it feels like they're across the world. So when I was speaking with Julia, she had so many amazing things to say about peak performance. This is her specialty, and this is what she works at organizations on. And she's developed a specific methodology. And I thought, this is so incredible for you as my listeners to really understand. You've heard me talk on this podcast about what it's like to be a corporate athlete, what it means to really operate at these peak performance states. And I think so many of us take stress and other sorts of like being in the weeds, or this job is just hard, or this is just the way it is, for granted. And when you really meet exceptional executives, people who have been able to not only manage their own levels of stress, but really take control of their productivity, you can see that there are other options out there. And so I wanted to bring Julia on today to talk to us about some of those other options, to give us some tools, and then to also share her own journey, because I'm fascinated by it and I just want to learn more from her as well. Let me give a more formal introduction before we get started. Julia Arndt is the founder of the Peak Performance Method, a unique model combining critical productivity, mindfulness, and leadership tools to help forward-thinking individuals and organizations develop the next workplace superpower through scalable programs. After working at Google in Silicon Valley for 7.5 years, while the company grew from 30,000 to 100,000 employees, Julia has been running her own consulting and coaching business, helping over 7,000 employees at innovative companies. Julia, I'm so excited to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Stacy. I'm super thrilled to be here as well.
So let's just start. What do you feel like personally are some of your secrets to success?
The biggest one is consistency. I talk about this all the time. I actually joined a panel discussion last week at an event here, like a local event in Reno. And the panel discussion was on mental health and entrepreneurship. And it was really interesting to hear, obviously the other panelists speak from their own experience, but then also hear the questions from the audience. And I think it always makes me realize that I'm a pretty structured and disciplined person. And I really believe in consistency. And I think for me, it comes super natural. And I don't really It's just who I am, and I don't really question it. But as I'm surrounding myself with leaders, of course, as I'm, one-on-one coaching them, but also with entrepreneurs, just friends and other female leaders that are building their own businesses, I do get constantly that reminder that I'm a pretty structured person. And I think that's the secret to my success, because when I started my own business, I told myself, well, I'm here for the long run. I'm not just doing this for a year to see what's going to happen. I really believe in this mission. I really believe in this company. And I really believe in social media. And I really believe in YouTube. And I really believe in nurturing my audience. And I know it takes time. It's not going to be something that's going to happen from one day to another. It's a long game thing. And so I set myself the goal at the beginning of the start of my company, which was in February 2019, so a little bit over 3 years now. And I set myself the goal to record 1 podcast a week, 1 YouTube video a week, and post 4 times on Instagram a week, and send 1 weekly newsletter a week. And I haven't not done it once in the last over 3 years.
You are amazing. Oh my gosh, this is such a big deal. I love it.
Yeah.
But what you just described is basically a process that you created. And being an entrepreneur myself and having my own business, I realized that there are so many ways that we can be leaders in our company. And there are so many possibilities open to us. And if we want to structure our business in one way, that's possible, or another way. And I think the same is true for executive leadership. And what is so fascinating about what you outlined is it sounds like it was an internal discipline, that it was just like, this is what I'm going to do. This is the goal that I'm going to set, and I'm going to do these certain things versus, and I'm making an assumption here that you had somebody who was like, you know what, Julia, if you want to be successful, this is what you got to do. Right. And just because I can tell by the way that you described it. And I think that for executive leaders, we have role models and people around us that are creating their own careers in a certain way that maybe doesn't feel like the way we want to create it, but we sort of feel like, oh, we have to go with that methodology. We have to do it that way. Otherwise, we can't be an executive. So can you tell us more about this creation of your own discipline? I have a feeling that it's twofold, right? You might be a disciplined person in general, and that's just your strength, but it has to also have been something that you created for yourself.
When it comes to discipline and building your business, I think there's always that balance between what is authentic and what is a little bit of a pain, but you still have to do it.
Yes,
right? You have that no matter exactly. If you are working at a company or if you're building your own business, right? There's always things that you enjoy doing and that you love doing. And there are things that are a little bit more painful, but like when we were talking on my podcast about leadership and about promotions, you were saying, have these conversations, right? These conversations with leaders on an ongoing basis, and make this not just part of going towards the promotion, but because you're really curious about this. And I thought it was really powerful, because some people might think, I don't really want to do this, but in the long run, it's actually something really helpful. What I've been really doing, I've been just following other leaders in the space that have really inspired me and that have done a great job, and that have shown that through their consistency, in the long run, their hard work paid off. And I really believe in that. And so I think you always need to find the balance between what do I need to do and what still feels authentic as well. And I do this all the time. And I think I still find a lot of flexibility in the decisions that I make. Like when I started my company 3 years ago, it had a completely different name, and it was a little bit focused on other things. And then over the first year working with clients and with groups, I realized, there's actually that productivity piece that I hadn't really thought about at the initial stage of starting my business. And then I rebranded in the second year, and I actually redid my logo design and branding. Not like I still have the same company name now, but it's, it evolves over time every year because it's fun and it's creative, and I develop and evolve as a person. And so as a leader, it is important to find that balance.
There are two things that come to mind. One thing is, I think we might have talked about this on your podcast too. I'll definitely link to that interview. It's so rich and really fun in the show notes. But we talked about strengths and finding your strengths. And the way you just described this idea of productivity, I want all of the listeners to remember that our strength is the biggest thing that we take for granted. So the way you described it, it's like, you have this strength, which is that you're incredibly disciplined and productive and consistent. And it just comes easy and naturally to you. And so then therefore you're like, oh, that's not something that I teach. It's just something that I do. And then you realize what a key component was and how valuable that would be to other leaders, and that you could bring that into organizations and teach them to literally create peak performance. And I think that is so fascinating and amazing. And I applaud you for being able to notice that and really so quickly, right? Just a year into your business. So that's super cool. So the second thing that I wanted to point out was this idea that you basically developed your own leadership style and then you were willing to pivot in it. And I think for so many women, it feels like I need to come up with the perfect strategy. Like when I ask them to define their leadership style, sometimes they're like paralyzed and they're like, I don't know, I can't come up with it. And a lot of times it's because they feel like that's the end. Right? If I name this leadership style, then that's just who I am. That's how I'm defined. But it sounds like you've been able to reinvent yourself, and that actually is becoming part of who you are. And that ability to reinvent, that willingness to say, I'm not one-dimensional, right? I have many different facets to both my business and my own personality and how I show up as a leader. So can you share with us a little bit more about how you're able to continuously make, it sounds like, very bold decisions, but then also be willing to pivot along the way?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned over the last 3 years is that reinventing yourself is fun. And people that have been listening now for the last few minutes are probably wondering at this point where I'm from, because I have an accent. And I do like to kind of refer to this, even though it might be silly, because I don't think that every German is like super structured and disciplined. But I do believe that a little bit about myself. And I do believe that that's kind of where it's coming from. So I grew up in Germany for the first 21 years of my life. That's where I was born. That's where my whole family still is today. I'm the only outcast that lives abroad. And I'm super disciplined person, to the point that probably sometimes it gets a little bit rigid, right? And I think over the last few years, I've really learned to find flexibility through just my own learning process and my, just kind of my experience, but obviously also working with other leaders and seeing how they were struggling and how, they kind of almost reflected back to me. Like, when I'm, for example, talking with them about time management or setting boundaries, I'm like, this is not something that you can never break again, right? When you're thinking about boundaries, for example, and you think about the rules that you're trying to set with other people, you always think, I think we always go into this like all or nothing kind of mindset.
Exactly.
And so what I've learned as a German that is very disciplined and structured is that it is absolutely okay to be flexible and to find ways to reinvent yourself. Because imagine if you would always be the same way, like it would be super boring, right? And it is really fun to get inspired and to see other people and see what works for other people, and to see what also doesn't work for yourself, right? Because sometimes you might see something in another person and you might think, oh, wow, like this is super cool. I'm totally going to apply that or adapt that in my own life. And maybe 6 months down the line, or even just 3 weeks afterwards, you realize, hey, that actually doesn't feel authentic. That's not me. But that's great, because I think in that learning process, you learn that who you are, who you really are, I feel like you get more and more connected with who you are, and you let go of the things that you're not. And that makes you a more confident leader. It makes you a more authentic leader. It makes you more aspiring leader, I believe.
And more fun.
Yeah.
It's just so much more fun. I love it. One of the things that I really admired about you when I met you, and when you meet Julia, it's just like, she just has this kind of attitude of being very curious and very in the moment. And, we could call it mindfulness or something like that, right? It's like there are terms for this. When I met her, I was like, I want to learn more from her. I want to get to know her, right? And she just had this quality, this energy about her that made you want to be around her, which is incredibly magnetic and fun and enjoyable. And when I think about stress, and since that's the name-ish of your podcast, can we talk a minute about this idea of stress? And I'd love to learn more about your podcast and the journey and what you share with us in that podcast. And then how perhaps mindfulness, or this work of being curious and in the moment and flexible, as you've just described, actually creates less stress and allows us to have more freedom in our lives.
So I started the podcast while I was still working for Google, actually, because I had that realization after going through a burnout myself in 2018 that a lot more people were struggling. I think in the moment when everything happened and when kind of, my world came crashing down, I felt really guilty. I felt really alone and lonely in that process, because it is scary, right? Burnout in 2018 wasn't even an officially recognized disease by the World Health Organization. I had never had any mental health issues. My family never had any mental health issues. So I didn't really know what that was and where it came from, I don't know. It was just kind of an interesting process. And so through that process and through going myself to stress management workshops and learning more about where stress comes from and what it really is and how can we manage it, I realized, wow, there are so many people out there that are actually struggling with this, and so many people that probably also don't know this information that I just learned. When I got back to the company after my medical leave, I reached out to some internal groups and asked if people would be interested to also learn more about stress management, because I had learned so much. And so in, I think, a matter of 2 days, I had over 350 people reaching out to me from all different offices all over the world. And they shared with me their own struggles and their own stories. And it was a really powerful time for me to realize, wow, I'm really not alone in this. And I thought to myself, there's no way that I can teach skills or strategies in a 1-hour workshop. I need to do more. And that's kind of when the podcast came to life. And I published my first episode, like I said, even before I left the company, on January 1st, 2019. I honestly love podcasts. I love it myself. I find podcasts super inspiring. It's been a wonderful process to meet so many aspiring leaders, so many inspirational people that do incredible work in the world. And honestly, during COVID has been also a really powerful networking tool for me to talk with other people, right? And so over the last 3 years, I've gotten over 75,000 downloads on the podcast. I don't know how many people I've interviewed, but I would say it's probably coming close to 100 people at this point. And I've had mindfulness speakers. I've had so many. Honestly, I love my podcast guests. I always celebrate them, and I think everyone has just something so unique to bring to the table. And it's taught me so many things about myself, and it has triggered so many questions in myself of how do I live a more mindful life? How do I create more awareness? And having these conversations, being more mindful in the moment of what is happening, has been a really powerful stress management tool. And, I think especially in the corporate world, as aspiring leaders, very intellectual, smart people, we always look for the complex solutions, because the complex solutions always feel more complex, feels a little bit more challenging in a way, right? And stress management is actually always going back to the basics. It's applying more simple tools in your life, and which mindfulness kind of embraces, because it's that fact of just being in the present moment and taking a deep breath and being there where you are right now, and instead of thinking about the past or the future. And I'm far from being perfect. I obviously think about these things too, and there's moments where it's harder for me and moments where it's easier for me, but obviously, since I'm in this work, it's wonderful because I get to talk about it all the time, and I get to be reminded on a regular basis to practice my own tools.
Yes, exactly. So I hear, okay, a couple of anecdotes to stress, and then I'd love to hear you elaborate on this a little bit more as to what we can actually do to help ourselves. One is mindfulness. Another thing that you've mentioned a couple times is this idea of connection, right? So understanding that you're not alone and that there are other leaders at your company that were also experiencing the same thing globally, and really feeling that it's not something that you did wrong, right? It's something that people experience. What else is there that we can do from a practical standpoint to help regulate our stress, so to speak?
Honestly, the biggest challenge that I've seen people have, why they do have stressful lives and why they do experience high anxiety, is their time management. That's kind of where I start. I usually start to educate people about burnout and what it is, because I think it's just important to understand the neuroscience of that, right? Like what happens in your brain, what happens in your body when you're having that stress trigger. And we believe, all of us have at this point heard about the fight or flight response, but we believe it only happens in like extreme dangerous situations. But it's happening all the time, every day, multiple times a day. And we're just riding that wave of high stress. And that's extremely unhealthy. 90% of doctor visits are stress-related illnesses, because our system is so affected by high levels of stress and unhealthy levels of adrenaline and cortisol. Again, like through this wonderful work that I've been doing and I've had the chance to do is really the realization that people struggle with their time, right? That's the first thing. I can tell people to meditate, and I can tell people to do yoga, and I can tell people that exercise is important. But if they feel like they don't have time to do that, it's
so tell me, so how do I manage, how do I manage my time? What do I do?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to take a snapshot of how you're currently managing your time. When do you get up in the morning? Do you check your emails first thing in the morning, right? Questions like that. And then looking at your calendar, one of the most powerful exercises that I do with clients is to do the following. It's just kind of 2 or 3 simple steps. Number 1, what are your priorities for the day and the week? So write down 2 to 3 priorities for the day and then for the week. And then the next step is to actually check your calendar to see if your meetings that you have align with the priorities that you have going on. And oftentimes, the calendars that I oftentimes see working with my tech clients is that they're filled with meetings, back-to-back meetings all day long, all week long. And then what happens is that their project time, the things that they actually have to get done, happens either really early in the morning for the people that like to get up really early, or really late in the evening, or during the weekends. And that obviously, if we are constantly connected, and again, when we are constantly connected and we have all of these different triggers like email here and meeting there and notification here, it triggers our stress response. And so we're riding on high levels of stress, and that becomes super unhealthy over the long term. And so time management, to actually manage your calendar based on your priorities, is a huge game changer. And I get this feedback over and over again. I've done this now, for over 3 years for myself, applying it in my own life, but also obviously helping leaders do it in their own life. And it's made all the difference, because then when you take control over your time, which is the first kind of awareness or intentional thing to do, is to realize I'm actually managing my time, right? I've had conversations in the past. I remember this PM in a workshop once who was absolutely convinced that he did not manage his time. And it was such a powerful moment, because I said to him, if that is what you believe, that's the problem. If you feel like you don't manage your time and you have no control over your time, then of course, like, you are the victim of these external circumstances. But if you take a moment to really take that power back and to remind yourself that you manage your time, like those are also the biggest realizations for my clients, that they are like, oh, like I've had that meeting on my calendar, and after this workshop or after the conversation with you, I reached out to this organizer and said to them, do I really need to be there, or can we change it? And people changed it, and they're like, yes. And they changed the meeting, and I'm like, or they told me I don't have to be in this meeting. And I'm like, yes, because you have to question, like you have to be your own timekeeper and you have to challenge these things instead of just taking them for what they are. And that's really powerful. And that always obviously excites me as well to see how when people make these changes, because then when you see that you can manage your time and you start to set those boundaries and you start to actively manage your calendar, then you can create space for your projects during your workday and not before or after or during the weekend. And then you have 15 minutes to take a nap or to go outside in nature or to be active or to be more mindful, because I think the biggest problem is that we don't have the time. We just run from one thing to another. We don't take a breath anymore, right? We are not aware in these moments because we are just doing instead of reflecting and being what we need to be in order to show up as our best selves.
Amazing. I love that so much because it sounds like there is this idea of taking back control. So I'm just going to reiterate what we're learning today because I think it's so fantastic. So if you want to feel less stressed, it's like be more mindful, and then also this idea of taking back control, really understanding that you are always in control of your time. You are a time management tool, right? And if you think that you're not, that's causing part of the stress, and being able to really look at this bigger picture and really take that step back. Because I think for a lot of executive leaders, that's a huge part of our job, is that we can take that step back, right? That we can look at the bigger picture, like in our actual work. And if we're constantly reacting and constantly in the weeds and constantly putting out fires in the middle of the night, then we're never going to be able to have that bigger perspective. And so what better way to do it than on your own life as well? And it also carries over into making you more effective and a peak performer, so to speak, at your job as well.
Well, here's the other thing that I think is really important to mention, especially for your listeners that are striving towards that next promotion, right? When you get to the next promotion, you will have less time because you will have more responsibilities. And if you don't learn these really basic tools of time management and calendar management and gatekeeping your time and setting boundaries, you will burn out. Like I see this, I work with VPs and I work with really senior managers and directors, and they haven't learned that. And they usually burn out. And then they realize they have to make a change because they burn out oftentimes multiple times until they realize that they actually have to change some habits in order to not get into that burnout cycle anymore. And so, I think, my biggest mission is to bring peak performance programs actually into onboarding programs of companies, because I truly believe that people need to learn these really simple skills at the beginning of their career. It's not something we should learn after 3 years or 5 years, because time management, like this is such an important habit, and you can be so incredibly successful when you master that.
Absolutely. And I think that it also limits your success in the roles that you choose not to go for, because I think as women, we're incredibly intuitive and we sort of see that burnout right before it happens. And we can kind of see, if I take this role, everything that I'm doing now is just going to be magnified. And so I don't want to take that role. And so a lot of times they say that women don't raise their hand because of imposter syndrome. And I really believe that we don't raise our hand because we don't want to put up with the crap. And so what I suggest to my leaders a lot of times is like, let's not put up with the crap. And what is the crap? The crap is that we're poorly managing our own time. Exactly as you're saying, we're putting up with a lot of things being thrown at us and reacting and different things like that. And so flip that and start to take back control, so to speak, then we can scale ourselves. Because I want you to be in that higher level position, right? Your company needs you, and we want you to be able to raise your hand, but not to create burnout for yourself. And so I love that. There was something that you said earlier that I just thought was fascinating. So this is a little side tangent, but you talked about burnout as being a disease. And so I was like, ooh, tell me more. What does that mean?
Well, so, I think over the last 2 years, especially with the pandemic, mental health has become more of a topic, right? And when we talk about mental health, we oftentimes think about anxiety and depression. Those are kind of the biggest, most common mental health diseases that people suffer from nowadays. And then there's burnout. And burnout is kind of somewhat a combination of anxiety and depression, but really coming from the workplace. It's really workplace burnout, workplace related stress that has led to us experiencing mental and physical symptoms. And so the World Health Organization recognized burnout as an official disease in May 2019. And I think it's really powerful. And it just shows that really so many people suffer from it. So many people have issues with burnout. And I always say, it's interesting how we made COVID a pandemic, because burnout is a pandemic too. The newest numbers, the newest research from 2021 specifically showed that 9 out of 10, 89% of US workers experience burnout. And it's a big problem. And if we don't start to create awareness around that, and we don't, because it's not like you can't get out of it, it's kind of almost self-inflicted and self-imposed habits that we have built in our lives because we are peak performers. I think we have sometimes also learned very unhealthy habits to sustain that level of performance, but it is not a healthy level. It's actually not sustainable. It's maybe sustainable for the long run, but not for the short run, but for the long run.
It feels refreshing to hear that it's a disease, right? Because you talked about how it's this self-inflicted, this thing that we did to ourselves. And for me personally, when I start to think about things that I've done to myself, then I feel bad about myself. I make it even more of a problem because I say, well, if I did it to myself, then I'm the problem, right? I'm the reason. I'm the solution, but I'm also the problem. And when you think of it as a disease, and when you think 9 out of 10 workers experience burnout, then you feel a sense of relief, and it lets that emotional toll of it being my fault to really be able to transition into the solution. Okay, so if I have control over this, then what can I do to prevent it? What can I do to change it? Right? I'm not the terrible person that created this for myself. It is something that is commonly created for many, many different leaders. And how can I start to pull myself out of it? And I think that's so helpful.
Yeah. And, I was just thinking, as you were saying that, in the past, we probably didn't call it burnout. We, the burnout just showed in other ways. It either showed as like an anxious depression or something, or it showed as like literally physical symptoms. Like I talk about this all the time with people. They feel so exhausted. They feel so overwhelmed. And then, they constantly get sick because their immune system is super low because of the high levels of stress all the time. So the body doesn't have time to recuperate and recover, or they have panic attacks. I have multiple friends that I know that have experienced that. I've had many people on my podcast that have talked about how they got to that point where they realized it was just too much, or it could be really anything. And I think that's a little bit maybe also the tricky thing about stress, because it's not just like, this is this one symptom, and if you have it, then that's stress or that's burnout. It's so individual in every person. And so to really recognize that, and that's what I talk about as well, like to identify your early warning signals, your own, like your individual early warning signals of what do you do? What do you experience when you have high levels of stress? Maybe your shoulders are super tense, or your eye is twitching all day long, right? Or you have a stomach ache or digestive issues, or you feel super angry. I talk with people again all the time about this. They say to me, I am feeling, because they say yes to everything and they want to please people and they want to do so many things at the same time, they get resentful with the people at the same time, because it's just too much, and they know that they can't, it's actually not really feasible, but they also have not really learned how to say no. So
and I love it, because what you're doing is you're saying no to something so that you can say yes to peak performance. Yes. And I think that's just such a great theme. So speaking of your peak performance methodology, why do you personally feel motivated to have a seat at the table, to have this voice in the community?
Because I truly believe it can help so many people. And it's the simple tools and it's the things that are not taught in school and that are not taught in college, right? I think there's a lot of unhealthy habits that we learn in those structures. I'm really grateful to have a seat at the table so I can help people understand that it's not just the way they feel. It's not just, not just accepting burnout as you want to be a leader and want to be successful. It doesn't have to be that way. There's actually another way. And it was really powerful for me. It was really powerful for many of the people I've worked with. And I want to help more people.
I love that. So how can we find you if we want to learn more about you and also your podcast, of course?
Yeah. So the podcast is called Stressed. And it's a little bit of a unique writing. So I'm just going to spell it just to make sure that people know this STRESSD instead of the ED. It's just the D. So that's the Stressed podcast, which you can find on all the platforms, right? Spotify, iTunes, and so on. And then the best probably space to just start is my website, which is www.peakperformancemethod.com. And then I'm obviously, as I mentioned, I'm good on Instagram and good on YouTube. You can find me there under my name, Julia Arndt, and then coaching.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Julia. So any final words of advice for a woman who's looking to transition into higher level leadership positions? Anything that we either haven't talked about or that you want to expand upon before we go today?
Yeah, there was actually one other question that I really liked that you sent me earlier. And I do want to kind of elaborate on that because I thought that was a powerful question, which was, what did you have to let go of in order to kind of be in that leadership position? And I think I had to let go of being the victim. I think we are oftentimes making our external circumstances responsible for how we feel. And it's easier to point the finger and say, but if only this would be different, then I would be so much better, right? Like I at the time when I was struggling with a lot of different things, I was always thinking, if my partner would be this way, or if my manager would allow me this thing, or if only I would get this other project, then I could be in my power. And through personal development and listening to podcasts, like when I started my whole personal development journey, it was one of the biggest things that resonated with me, where I was like, oh, I'm actually the victim. Or I'm putting myself in this victim mindset or in this victim role of everyone else's fault, just not my fault. And actually and I had to let go of that and actually stepping into my power and realizing it's my responsibility. And there's always something I can do. There's always something that's in my control. And I need to focus on these things instead of focusing on the things that are outside of my control. I would say have made all the difference.
Huge. Oh, that's so good. Julia, thank you again so much for being here. I've loved this conversation as I knew I would. And I look forward to our continuing connection and relationship as well.
Me too. Thank you so much, Stacy.
Hold up. Wait a minute. Before you go, I want to tell you about the changes that I have made to the Executive Ahead of Time coaching program. I recently celebrated my 1-year anniversary of that program. And as a celebration, I decided to open it up for lifetime enrollment for all members. So what does that mean for you? It means that as soon as you join us inside of Executive Ahead of Time, you get immediate access to the 24 core training modules. You will get weekly live group coaching from me, and you'll also be invited to our weekly roundtable discussions where you get to connect with other peers, other powerhouse women, all looking to advance themselves into senior executive leadership positions for life. You are going to get lifetime access to everything that I offer inside of Executive Ahead of Time. So if you've been listening to this podcast and you resonate with everything that I share here, then run, do not walk to join us inside of the program. Go to executiveaheadoftime.com to register yourself today for lifetime lifetime enrollment. The earlier you register, the more lifetime coaching you get from me inside of the program. Go to executiveaheadoftime.com, and I cannot wait to see you inside.